I'm going to go down the row, and they're going to wave as I read their names, and then they're going to tell you more about themselves. First is Kevin Kang, who is the Program Director for United We Dream. Did you wave? We have Danielle Paris from Dream Defenders. Kristal Raheem from Students for Quality Education. Aileen, Sheil, who's the chair of New York Public Interest Research Group. Krug, who is the Program Associate for NYPIR. Rachel Storch, President of the New Jersey United Students Association. Maggie Thompson, the Director for Higher Ed, Not Debt. Sophia, Zaman, President of the United States Student Association, and Maxwell, the Vice President of USSA. And our moderator is Kim Jarrett from the California Faculty Association.
United Dream is the largest undocumented youth-led organization in the country. We have over 50 affiliates across 25 states, and we're all working towards dignity of immigrants, undocumented immigrants across the country. And currently what I do basically is I develop initiatives that ultimately builds upon the power, the grassroots power of our affiliates. One of our programs is what we call the Dream Educational Empowerment Program. And what we're doing with the program is we're trying to build the capacity of our affiliates to increase educational access across, for undocumented students right across the country. So right now our work is primarily, is involved in pushing forth campaigns, right, that expands the access, whether it's in-state tuition, state aid, right, which I think, for instance, for the folks that are in New York, there's a campaign going on for the New York State Freedom Act, which provides or allows undocumented students to access TAP, which is the local financial aid student aid grant. And then I think the third area is really actually, which I'd like to engage y'all in about, is increasing institutional investment towards undocumented students.
My name is Danielle Paris. I'm a student at Florida State University, currently in the Master's Program for International Affairs. I'm here representing Dream Defenders, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we got started, just for people that may not know. So like Kim said, we did start in the wake of the Trayvon Martin murder. A group of students, a small group of students, was very unhappy and very angry about Zimmerman not being arrested. So they organized a 40-mile march from pretty much like Daytona to Sanford, Florida, where then a small group of students decided to sit outside of the police department, Sanford Police Department, right in front of the entrance, and refuse to move until something was done. The Sanford Police Department actually decided to close down for the day. And we took that as not necessarily a win, but it kind of paralleled a story that, that we, from our communities, our respective communities, were kind of familiar with. Because for some people inside of our communities, and for some communities in general, the police department is always closed. So we took that as a win, but we knew that we couldn't end there. It was so powerful. The march was powerful, 40 miles, and we built relationships with each other. So we knew we couldn't stop there. So we decided that what we would do is we would create a network of students that were passionate about not only that issue, but we realized that there were so many connections about issues, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday. The intersectionality of all these different crises is crazy, and I was worried about what I was going to speak about here, because I was like, student debt. We organize around criminalization of our youth. We're talking about higher education. We're talking about kids are being funneled into the prison system. They can't even graduate high school. So what am I going to talk about in higher education? That's not our issue, but it kind of is, because what if we do win that fight? What if we do start graduating? Where's the access to higher education? Where are they going to get all this money from? Coming from these universities or coming from these communities. So what Dream Defenders does, or what we're trying to do, is try to create a sustainable network of youth and student leaders together. So it's a coalition of youth and student leaders across the state of Florida. It's a very young organization, not only in membership, but we only started in April 2012 with Trayvon Martin. And so far, we started from a small group in that March, and right now we have 7 chapters across the state of Florida. If you look at the map up there, we're at FAMU, Florida State, UCF, and a couple of other universities in South Florida. And the beautiful Reverend yesterday was talking about how do we sustain that energy from all that passion with Trayvon Martin. How does Dream Defenders continue to grow? And what we've done is something that she said she had a brilliant idea about, like trainings and workshops and civic engagement, because depending on who you're dealing with, they're not familiar with these different things. They're not familiar with organizing or building coalitions, and how do you do that? And she did have a brilliant idea to just start workshops and trainings and stuff like that, and that's exactly what Dream Defenders has been doing. So we basically train and organize youth and student leaders in civic engagement, in civil non-disobedience, and in direct action. So it's a beautiful question about what if you didn't waste all that time in the beginning planning and teaching people how to go about doing things. How much more powerful, how sooner would you have arrived at the win if people were already fired up, ready to go, as soon as you went to the door, like, hey, they're about to shut down downstate. Hey, we gotta go, we're organized, let's go. How much more powerful would it have been? And we noticed that very early, and so that's exactly what we do. We don't wait until you're 18 to start telling you about voting. We are out in communities teaching children in public schools how to organize. You don't like your lunch, your school lunch? How do we organize around those issues? And it's really important because children are really, really powerful, and they should have a say in the direction of where their communities are going. And so what we want is for when people are 18 years old, they are ready to voice their opinions. They understand that their stories are important. They understand that they do have a say in where their communities should be and the direction that they should be going. And so that's one of the things we do. We do go out into the community and help kids understand organizing and the importance of their voice. Other things that we do organize around the criminalization of our youth. The school to prison pipeline is disgusting. In 2011, 2012, I think there were over 13,000 reports of arrests from the school system. So they are funneling our youth into these prisons. And again, that intersectionality of why are they funneling our youth into prisons? Because prisons are for profit. So that is also our issue. So we organize around school to prison pipeline, divestment campaigns on our campuses. UCF actually had a big win last year. They did a sit-in in one of their president's meetings, and they basically demanded that he divest in private prisons because that is what our universities are doing. They are investing in private prisons. So that's another example of the intersectionality. When we're talking about, the school to prison pipeline, we're just looking at public schools and the kids that are being funneled in. But even us as students at our universities, as tuition payers, and we kind of support that because our own universities are out there investing in these private prisons. So that's that intersectionality all over again. What else do we? Okay, so our current campaign for the summer is we plan to register over 61,000 new voters in Florida, and that vote is primarily going to be young voters, so we're talking 18 to 35, somewhere around that age group. And we also help with undocumented students. We believe in quality education for all. We believe that there's a whole lot of undocumented students, especially in South Florida, that have been there for so long and have become a part of our communities. And we believe that they deserve at least in-state tuition. But I'm glad that we're talking about student debt, because once we have that win, and they do gain access to higher education, we do want to make sure that they don't have to suffer debt as well.
Yeah, so once again, my name is Kristal Raheem. I am a student organizer for Students for Quality Education. I specifically am an intern at the Sonoma State University. Thank you. I am specifically an intern at the Sonoma State University campus, that's in Northern California. We have 16 chapters throughout the CSU system, so 16 out of 23 CSU colleges. And basically what we do is we organize and mobilize students to fight for their rights on campus. So if students aren't getting the classes that they need, if they're not graduating on time, if they're concerned about student debt, we organize students and we educate them on the CSU system and basically the politics of their administration. Most recently, during the fall 2013 semester, we actually surveyed students in the 16 chapters. We sent out a standard survey for all students, and we asked them to discuss what type of things that they need in the CSU system and what problems they were facing. And the biggest issue that students were concerned about was student debt. Students are graduating with at least $16,000 in debt at this time, which is huge, especially first-generation college students and minority students are graduating with ample amounts of debt. And so what we do on our campuses is that we challenge administration, we lobby. Some campuses will do walkouts, sit-ins, protests, and things like that. Specifically at Sonoma State, we recently defeated our student success fee this past semester. And basically, basically what's happening in the CSU system right now is that administrators are proposing student success fees. And so they're telling students that if we increase the fees on our campus, that you will graduate on time, you will get the classes that you need, and we will hire more faculty. And so they've been doing that for years. And so every time there's a new batch of students coming in, they try to sell that student success fee to the students. And at Sonoma State specifically, we decided to combat that by challenging the administration and telling them what really the student success fee means. Since we've shut down the fee, actually a couple of weeks later, the university miraculously had the funds to hire more faculty for the up-and-coming year, which is ironic. And so while they are trying to provide more resources to the students, they're really not educating the students on where their money is going. Even when they were trying to impose the fee on the students, they would not specifically tell us where the funds would be allocated to. And so we were not aware if it was going in administrators' pockets, if it was going to classes. And so it's just really fuzzy when it comes to administrators imposing more fees on students. We also surveyed students, and 19.4% of students expect to have over $15,000 in debt once they graduate from the CSU system. And so that really speaks volumes, because when students enter the university, they usually don't know what debt is. And so that's where SQE comes in, and we basically tell them, when you're taking out these loans and when fees are increasing, you're really setting yourself up for a lot of trouble once you graduate, and you're going to be leaving with a really large ticket based on your educational experience. And so we've worked as a unit, the 16 chapters, to make sure that these fees are starting to disappear. As of yesterday, I just found out that San Jose State just had their president stop their fee increase. So we're really happy about that. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about how the university kind of systematically puts students in debt. And so one of the things that the university has done, specifically at Sonoma State, is that they're taking required classes and basically high demand classes, and they're moving them into extended education, so summer and winter courses, which is basically requiring students to pay extra to get the classes that they need during these winter intersession and summer intersession courses. And so students are, I know at Sonoma State specifically, it's for a 4-unit course, you're going to pay $1,280. And so if you need maybe 2 general education courses, you're easily paying about $5,000 just to take about 8 units. And that was my story specifically. I did have to take out loans to take summer courses at SSU, and I still didn't graduate on time. And so basically what the institution is doing is they're cutting down the class availability, they're admitting more students, and faculty are not able to teach all of these students, let alone the classes are over capacity, students are not being able to speak with professors and have that one-on-one educational experience with professors. And so it's really putting not only students in a difficult position, but it's also putting faculty in a difficult position as well, because they're not being paid enough to handle all of these amounts of students. Just recently at Sonoma State, we had the largest amount of freshmen being entered into Sonoma State, which was 1,000 freshmen this past year. And the university, the faculty, they just can't handle the workload. So faculty and students are actually suffering from the fee increases and the student debt. And so basically what SQE does is it's so important for us to educate the students. And so with the disorientation guides and with surveying students, we're able to get the student voice, and we take our findings to the administration on campus. And so we were able to defeat the fee, but at the same time, we still have a 16 unit cap at our university. That's forcing students to stay longer than 4 years because they can't get the classes that they need and they can't register for them. Registration is chaotic. Students coming in, freshmen, sophomores, they're taking just random classes just to get units to be a full-time student to receive financial aid. And so it's just very challenging for students to stay afloat at the CSC level and get the classes that they need and graduate on time. The average graduation rate at the CSU level is 6 years. That's how long it takes a student on average to graduate from the university. And I have some statistics from our disorientation guide, and this is basically the information that we do pass out to students. 3.8 million students have debt. 6.2 million students are at risk of defaulting on their loans. And the total amount of student debt in the US right now is $1 trillion. And so when students see these numbers, they realize that they could potentially be in a lot of trouble. And so that's why it's so important for us to fight the fees on campus for the students. And specifically during our social media campaign, when we fought our fee, we had students hashtag student stress fee and WTF, so what the fee. And so I know we were at the panel, a lot of people were kind of talking about how to get the youth engaged, and so that's one of the things that we did, because students, you know, we're always busy and we're running back and forth to class, and so half of the time they probably don't even want to take a piece of paper from someone on campus. But when you make things catchy and you kind of cater to the generational trend, it really opens students' eyes and it makes them want to get involved. And we made it very convenient for students. We just said send in a photo saying why you oppose the fee and just write something on a piece of paper. And so we had students sending in saying that they already work 2 jobs and they can't afford another $500 in student fees and things like that. We went to different student clubs and organizations, and so rather than waiting for people to come to us, we went to the students. And so we went in on club meetings, we popped in on classrooms. The California Faculty Association on my campus was really helpful because they allowed us to come into their classrooms and basically just tell them what's going on about the student fee and things like that. And so we were able to get in a lot of contact with students on campus. Along with that, we also collaborate with other student organizations on campus, so MECHA, BSU, fraternities and sororities and things like that. And so that really alarmed the administration because they expect us to be divided and they don't expect us to have enough time or common sense to organize on a solid issue. And so once you start telling people that you're being scammed and you're being charged too much and they're actually not going to take your money and apply it to anything positive for your educational experience, people start to wake up and they want to take action.
So NIPERG, like I said, is a statewide organization. I'm the chairperson for the board of directors, a full-time chairperson actually. And my colleagues on the board with me are students representing each of the college chapters that we have throughout the state. Each campus has a various number, and myself with the board reps decide what the organization is going to work on issue-wise. We work on a lot of things, not just higher education. We work on consumer issues, which is really part of the reason of how we first got it started. Environmental issues, hunger and homelessness issues, voter registration is a huge one, as it is for my co-panelists up here. Good government, and really just basically making state and city politics really accessible to students, because like we have mentioned here before, activating people politically is really the way to be able to start doing anything at all. The student movement that I mentioned before kind of at that time broke into two different categories: those that really wanted to do aggressive activism and civil disobedience, and those then that wanted to work within the system, and that's kind of where NIPERG was born out of. We felt that being able to work within the system and knowing the system and where the problems are coming from and how they work was a really good way to go about fixing things. And that's how NIPERG has been able to have its successes throughout the years, throughout our many campaigns. We have project coordinators on each of our campus that provide trainings for our students and internships for credit, which is how I actually got involved in NIPERG at Queens College, where I'm still an undergraduate student. And it's a really unique model that leaves students with a unique view on how to go about making social change.
And it's fine to go back to school, in order to get a better job or in order to, obtain a career. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But the economic aspect seems to be the primary focus of New York State's governor anyway, and of SUNY's chancellor, Nancy Zinfer, and many of our legislators have bought into that narrative, which is that higher education is a tool to be used to restart New York's economy, including tax-free zones and other giveaways to corporations. And what I think is lost, besides the tuition increases that we get while the state says they're broke. Of course, we can pay for stadiums and things like that, but we get tuition increases. But I think what really is lost is that education is inherently good, and that's what NIPERG believes. And that's what we work toward, that it has to be made more accessible and truly affordable before it can begin to help New York's economy.
So our membership is comprised, interestingly, we focus on reaching out to student governments, because while there's arguments on if they hold power or not, or if they're administrative puppets, we do acknowledge that they have the ability to have those meetings with administration, like the presidents of the universities and the provosts. So what we try to do is empower SGAs or empower people in student unions to take over SGAs so that we can have those resources, their funding, their institutionalized power, as well as the legitimization that we get from working with them. So the way that our membership works is that we have one person, the president of student governments from the universities automatically have a vote in our General Assembly, and then there are two positions that can be run through from a general election that primarily go to the radical student union base. So we have a good mixture of institutionalized folks as well as folks who are more willing to, stand up and fight back. So we have worked heavily with a lot of different partners. We consider them natural alliances. If you're not the governor, you're pretty much getting, excuse my French, screwed over by, the higher education system. So, folks like unions, some administrators have been very supportful. We work with also unions that aren't primarily higher education, like Working Families. In New Jersey, we have two Working Families. We have Working Families Alliance, which a lot of people might know, and we have Working Families United for the Fund for New Jersey, both of which we sit on the board of directors of, which is interesting. We do some work with them. We also work with local on-campus unions. A perfect example is Rutgers One, which is a coalition of staff, faculty, and students, and basically what they do is they meet and they work together on a whole host of issues. When faculty and staff are having their contract negotiations, students will be heavily involved in ensuring that they are not getting mistreated. They will turn out to their negotiations with signs, they will prepare speeches, they will speak in favor of the staff and faculty members and articulate how important it is for them not to have to worry about their job, because the self-interest is obvious. If our professors are being mistreated, we're not going to get quality education. If we have adjuncts that aren't getting paid fairly, then they're going to have to work at 4 different universities. How am I going to go meet with this professor? How am I going to ask them to write me a letter of recommendation? People should all think that way. So this helps us a lot because, like I mentioned before, the solidarity that we can give to these faculty and staff members, as well as the solidarity that they'll return to us. if we have to participate in an action and it might be deemed, controversial or radical, we might have faculty or staff there who'd be willing to be like, hey, these are our students, you can't harm them. We're here watching to make sure that you don't, do anything. And it also legitimizes us if we have, professors standing with us and being like, yeah, you can't, cut the funding from their multicultural centers, and you can't, raise their tuition as much because, it just gives us legitimacy. And protection also for the faculty, where if they want to get involved and they might want to take a stance against something, they don't have to worry about getting fired because, they can see that there are students who are mobilized and ready to rise up if anything happens to them. So it's kind of like we work together and it's nice. Unions also, at least on a statewide level, help provide us with funding. Currently, NJUS is working on a more stabilized funding structure, but going our anti-administrative and state stances is kind of difficult for us to institutionalize ourselves because some administrators would be like, oh, well, you can't go from our student fees because you're going against us. So we work on something called referendum, which basically would raise the student fees. In Rowan, it just passed. It's a $3.50 increase that goes to fund our organization. So we have autonomy over the money, so it's not reliant on administrators. But until we grow ourselves, unions have been giving us money, helping us fund our staffer, stuff like that. They actually paid for us to come to this conference and we could talk to you all, and so that we can learn from you all, because we work together, and by unifying, we're more able to take on the beast, metaphorically. Just some stuff that NJUS is working right now is something called NJ Help. We're really corny. We like spelling out things. It's the higher education legislative package, and it basically addresses issues of quality, accessibility, affordability, and transparency in higher education. So we have 6 bills. I'll go over them quickly. He's a death bill, which basically right now in the state of New Jersey, if you take out loans and you die and your parent co-signs it, the parent has to pay off that loan after death, which is super problematic because you shouldn't be mourning your child and paying off their student loans. And as my co-panelists mentioned, they can be $85,000 and your child isn't even using that. Okay. So tuition cap, which would cap tuition at a certain rate. A financial aid shopping sheet to provide students with the options of public and private loans before you get to school. Because many students don't know what they're taking out. They don't know that Sally Mae is evil. They don't know that, they can increase your rate willy-nilly if they feel as such. We're also advocating for a raise in EOF, which is an equal opportunity fund that primarily services people from marginalized groups, primarily people of color and people from a working class background. They provide them with the trainings when they come from failing school districts to be able to, properly assimilate into college, and they also provide them with a mentor, trainings, and etc. And we're looking for a $1.9 million increase because, again, Chris Christie has cut everything and he's kind of the worst. We're working on a bill that would address members of the LGBTQ+ community, primarily trans folk, who so when you want to change your birth certificate in the state of New Jersey, you have to get expensive surgery, which is classist, and also some people don't want it because it sterilizes you sometimes. So we're trying to change that so that you can change your birth certificate just by going to a psychiatrist, which would help address other issues. And state aid for dreamers, which is something that my other co-panelist, Kevin, was working on, which basically we got the right for people in New Jersey to have tuition equity to pay the undocumented folks to pay the in-state tuition, but unfortunately our governor vetoed the line that they would get state aid, so they're paying into the pool of state aid, but they're not getting it, so we're trying to work on that.
I'm Maggie Thompson. I'm the campaign manager for Higher Ed Not Debt. This panel is getting me really fired up, so I'll try to go pretty quickly, so I know we're loading you all up, and I think, to your point, this is all about having a dialogue and learning from each other. Higher Ed Not Debt, we're a new campaign. We just launched in March. We're a national multi-year campaign that's all about elevating the issue of student debt and higher education crisis, and really amplifying and bringing together groups across not just the education sector, but the broader progressive world to really get the national consciousness to realize that our system of higher education is broken, break it, and reform it. So we launched March 6th with an event in DC with Senator Warren and events across the country, and we've been going pretty hard since then. I'm personally really excited to work on this issue. I got started in organizing. I'm from Wisconsin, and was working on my parents' AFT members, so it's been a rough couple years, but one of the first campaigns I ever worked on was the successful campaign for a living wage in Minneapolis and St. Paul, which was a campaign to say that if a store or business had any sort of public money going to it, tax increment financing, whatever, that they would have to pay a living wage because we as the public don't want to subsidize jobs that don't pay a living wage. And it's just funny, I feel like I'm sort of coming full circle. I've worked on a lot of campaigns since then, and in higher education, this whole idea, why is public money funding things that aren't giving us the best outcomes, is the same. It's the same thing in the higher education system. So this is a really exciting issue for me to work on. So one of the things that we talk a lot about is that as exciting as all the work that we are doing in the education spaces, and as awesome as the mobilizing that's happening in this room is, we really, if we are going to win this fight, we need to build our base, and the higher education community by itself does not have the power right now to change this system. So how do we build power across our organizations and expand it? Just to think about sort of the potential of this issue, this is something that I believe somebody mentioned, we're at over $1 trillion in student debt. So it's more than credit cards and auto loans in this country combined. Why aren't we hearing about it more? We have one aligning principle, and basically if you want to be involved in the campaign, you have to agree with this, that higher education is a public good, very important, it's a public good, that should be affordable and accessible to all without the burden of debt or financial hardship. And that's it. But there's a lot in that statement that we can unpack, and that really captures a lot of, it captures, US Krug is running a tuition or a textbook campaign. We have people that are working on adjunct campaigns. We have people that are working on state divestment. We have people that are working on what the connection between Wall Street and the higher education sector is and all the profits that are being made. So I think that our job as at Higher Ed Not Debt is taking all of the great work that's happening in the individual campaigns that the people up here and that all of you are working on, and to shout about it, to make it louder and to make it clear to the country as a whole that this is one issue, this is one crisis that we're all working on together. So it's really just about weaving together all of this great work that's happening, because I think that we are greater than the sum of our parts with all these different campaigns that we're running across the country. So 4 areas that we really focus on. First thing is, how do we help those 40 million people? Over a third of student loans in this country are in default, so over 90 days late. People are struggling with this debt. And student loans are sort of, we talk about how they're special in this really sort of awful kind of way. You can't refinance a student loan. That's the majority of student loans, you can't do it. So sort of why can you refinance your mortgage or any other kind of loan, but you can't refinance a student loan? There are absolutely no bankruptcy protections. So to your point, it sticks with you till you die, and if you die, it goes to your co-signer. Even in the cases of tragedy, there are over 115,000 seniors in this country that are having their Social Security checks garnished because of student loan debt. So what kind of country are we where we have this sort of special kind of debt that always stays with you and you can't discharge through bankruptcy? And then on top of that, the lack of consumer protections on student loans is staggering. After the financial crisis, we heard a lot about the abuses in the housing market, and Chris Hicks from Jobs with Justice can tell you all about when he talks the abuses that are happening in the student loan market, because there are even fewer protections. A company like Sallie Mae doesn't have to tell you if they package up your loan in a bundle and sell it to another bank and you're paying the wrong person and then you're in default, but you had no idea that your loan was sold. Totally legal. Happens every day. Happens all the time in this country. So really, the first pillar of our campaign is working on sort of how do we help the people that have that debt now. And one of the really exciting things that's happening is the US Senate is going to be taking up a vote on student loan refinancing early this June, which is really sort of the first big package, and the Democratic caucus is throwing themselves behind it. Obviously, refinancing is just one part of this issue, but it's sort of the first thing that we've had that's really gotten at the federal level this national attention for help for the borrowers themselves. So we need to kick and scream about it, and then use the education or the energy that comes from that fight to build out more protections for borrowers. So that's sort of the first pillar. The second thing that we work on is something that a lot of people up here have talked about, is the affordability issue. How can we be on the offensive when it comes to education affordability? And I think, for all of the radical tactics that I think are the most fun about a campaign like this, the sit-ins, the marches, the takeovers, what we're asking for, and I think this is something that gets lost sometimes, this isn't a radical thing that we're asking for. A generation ago, college was free. It's not like this is some crazy liberal idea that, we should have free college and oh, it's never been done, oh my. This is something very fundamental and basic that we're asking for, and we need to get the American consciousness back to the place where they believe that higher education is a right and not a privilege, a personal privilege that we're supposed to provide. For affordability, and how do we be offensive? And there's some fantastic organizing that's happening around this by people up here on this panel that have talked about it. I think one of the groups in our coalition is an organization of groups in California called Refund California. I'm guessing some California folks are involved. But what they've done is, instead of just saying, we need to restore cuts to higher education, we need more money, we need this, they've sort of flipped the conversation to set up a values choice about higher education. They went and they looked at the California state budget and they said, where's the money that we're leaving on the table? And they found $5 billion. A lot of it is in the oil extraction tax that even Sarah Palin in Alaska signed an oil extraction tax in California, and some of them doesn't have it. So they identified money there. And they also, to speak to Danielle's point about intersectionality, identified $1 billion the state was going to have in their budget for restructuring the prison program, which is, it's a really great, if we want to win on this issue, we can't just say we need more money for higher education, we need to set up those choices for people. We need to be putting our kids through higher education, not in the prison system, and look how much our state is spending on prisons. So I think that for affordability and accessibility, that's one of the things that we're working on a state-by-state issue, and AFT is a real partner in this. How do we figure out sort of those Easter eggs in the budget, or how do we figure out the best way to message and set up the values choice in our states so that we can restore higher education? And while we're at it, let's talk about state divestment and make sure that that story is really clear. I'm sick of hearing people, in the public consciousness, people are wondering, how did tuition increase 1,100% in the last 30 years? Because it did, 1,100% in the last 30 years. How did this happen? And, there's so many theories. It's, demand went up. A lot of the same things that we heard about the healthcare costs and how they skyrocketed. The favorite Republican line is, it's when the federal government got involved in higher education and that's why tuition went up. No. Like the states pulled the money out and it's a public good that the public is not investing in anymore. So we need to just get out there and tell that story and then be offensive about how we're talking about funding. And I think, Rachel, what you said is really excellent about this. Another piece that we're working on is not just the state issue, but nationally. How can we talk about higher education aid, and basically make clear that, aid is not a loan. A loan is not aid. Can we legislate that? How do we get out there? Because I'm sort of sick of those letters that, prospective students get, like, congratulations, welcome to our university. 100% of your costs are covered, and 80% of that is loans for $30K. It's criminal the way that this investment is sort of represented as something that should just be expected, and that you should just obviously sign on the dotted line, because this is an investment in your future and it's your responsibility, not the public's. So that's the second pillar, sort of affordability. And the third pillar that we're working on, I think, is maybe one of the most exciting, is how do we tie this to all the fights that are happening around income inequality in this country? Because we believe that student debt is a fundamental driver of income inequality, not just in terms of accessibility for people to be able to go to college in the first place, but on the back end, there was just a study released this week that said that the average graduate under the age of 40 has a net worth of $8,700. We are stealing the future of the next generation, and that is an incredible driver of what is driving income inequality in this country. So, to my earlier point, we can't just have higher education groups working on this. It's building the relationships with the energy that came out of things like the Occupy movement, the people that are working on, sort of getting rid of these no tax policies across the country, because this is an issue that we really need to be tying to that. And the fourth part that we talk a lot about, and I think is really exciting, with 2014 coming up, and I think it's so exciting that you all are doing voter registration. I'm in DC, so we can do it there too, but it's much more exciting out in the States. How do we electoralize this issue? We think that we're at a similar place with student debt as we were with healthcare 20 years ago. Healthcare didn't used to be, I have to think of a better way to say this, but like a capital I issue. It was sort of people that were struggling to pay their own medical bills. You know, it was something that was talked about, but it wasn't necessarily, you know, healthcare as, you know, an issue that was talked about in every debate, that every candidate had to have a plan on, that was sort of in the public consciousness and in their face every day, in that, you know, sort of in the cycle of campaigns. And we think that student debt is big enough, it's impacting the economy enough, that we really need to make sure that student debt and the higher education system is a part of every electoral conversation in this country. So why aren't we hosting debates for every Senate candidate in this country and demand that they have a plan on higher education and student debt? And really, how do we build out so that not just us in this room, but again, the broader progressive community, that we're holding their feet to the fire, that these electoral organizations are also making this a priority and have a plan to address it.
A little bit about our organization, our organizational structure is actually not too dissimilar from a union, right? So we have local direct member campuses who choose to affiliate very similarly to what Rachel was talking about. We often work with the student government who may or may not be the grassroots base, but they have grassroots resources, right? They have access to administration and they have standing budgets, right? And they choose to affiliate with our organization. And we really develop folks to either to sort of take over that organization and utilize those resources to support multicultural organizations on campus, to support progressive organizations on campus, to help us win and run campaigns. And we also have statewide affiliates, one of which is New Jersey United Students. And so we're really interested in sort of developing statewide student power and making sure that students are really united when the cuts around higher education are happening at the statewide level, particularly to systems in public universities.
We actually have a lot, and I'm glad there's people from Montreal here, we actually have a lot to learn from these student movements in other countries. And it kind of relates to our vision for not just higher education as a right, but free higher education for anybody, no matter what their socioeconomic status, their race, their ability, their documentation status. We don't care. We believe that everybody should have the right to go to school. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Sophia to talk about one of our current campaigns, and then we're going to wrap it up with something at the end.
Flashback to 2012, we have an annual legislative conference every spring, and this is around the time, this was my 4th year in college. I was about to graduate, and I was recognizing, I'm about to graduate with $24,000 in student loans. I picked a public university because it was supposed to be the affordable option. My sister was about to graduate from medical school with over $200,000 in student loans. My mother co-signed our loans and had her own credit card debt. Between the three of us, we were over $250,000 in debt. And Sally Mae owned the majority of that. And so I was terrified, right? Like not only am I terrified about my job prospects, but I'm terrified of the idea of being chained to this debt for the rest of my life, and I know I'm never ever going to be able to pay that off. Not to mention the interest that's occurring on top of it. And so, I really became interested in this campaign around holding Sally Mae accountable for profiteering off the backs of people like me, on the backs of people of all these people at this table. And so, students were really fired up, and we decided to march to Sally Mae's DC lobby office. And we had 36 students sit outside and demand a meeting with the, at the time, CEO Albert Lord. We wanted a meeting to talk about, this is my experience as a student. I'm graduating $24,000 in debt, and you don't know what it's like, right? Because all y'all graduated with when Pell Grants actually covered the cost of tuition and the cost of fees, right? Y'all graduated, a lot of y'all are white men who never had to worry about student debt, right? And so, we felt like it was our responsibility to make sure that our experiences were being uplifted, and we wanted to make sure that we were being taken seriously as the people who were being most directly affected by this issue. And of course, we were met with resistance, and we were arrested. One of whom was this guy right here.
Tell my parents.
Yeah, and for us, that was a really jarring moment to see. All we wanted was a meeting to meet with the CEO, and instead he arrested us. And so, That didn't stop us, right? We decided to go to Sallie Mae shareholder meeting in Delaware. And we stood outside, I shared my story. There were riot police there. It was really interesting. And 5 people went in and to hand over petitions, 42,000 petitions that we had collected throughout the summer period for Albert Lord to meet with students. And again, we were met with resistance. But that, again, didn't stop us. We continued to build power. We started realizing that the Sallie Mae is practicing really egregious practices, right? They're engaging in redlining policies, which disproportionately hurt communities of color, right? They are overcharging active duty military service members and hurting veteran students. And we knew this, right? Like this is our story. These are our experiences. And so we went to the Department of Education and we said, Secretary Arnie Duncan, you can't be doing business with a corporation that's breaking the law. You can't be doing business with a corporation that's hurting our communities. And we stood outside the office and we won a meeting with Secretary Duncan, and we shared our experiences with him, and we said, you know, this is unacceptable. The federal government needs to do better, and so. From there, we were able to go to the Sallie Mae shareholder meeting again, and we learned, right, if we're not going to be taken seriously, well, we're going to buy shares, and we're going to go inside. And we actually partnered with a lot of organizations. President Weingarten from AFT was with us and introduced a resolution, several resolutions around executive compensation, around Sallie Mae's engagement with the American Legislative Exchange Council, which purports laws like Stand Your Ground, which spreads laws like right to work, which hurts our communities. And we said, Sallie Mae, like, you cannot be a part of these organizations. You cannot be a part of this organization. You have to meet with students. You cannot continue to profiteer off the backs of students. And so out of that, we won a meeting with their executives, and we presented these demands, and we were met with no's all across the board. We're not going to drop out of ALEC. We're not going to talk about executive compensation. We're not going to talk about disclosing our lobbying practices. That's not something we're interested in. And so we continued to build power, and we decided to continue collecting petition signatures. And by the end of the summer, we built enough pressure that Sallie Mae dropped out of ALEC. They were actually the 50th organization to drop out of ALEC, which was for us was very exciting. And so now we're in a position where we're going to continue building power with the Debt for Future campaign, with Jobs with Justice. I think that for us, we're really excited about what the possibilities are around changing sort of the industry of higher education, and we know that Sallie Mae isn't the only organization that's engaging in these bad practices. But for us, we want to be talking about college affordability. We want to be talking about access. We want to be talking about the experiences that, like I said, that we share, because we know that this is all not news for us. This is the life that we live every day, and we really see our role as uplifting those voices and making sure that we're holding those organizations accountable.
Can't stop!
Won't stop!
Can't stop!
Won't stop!
Can't stop!
Won't stop!
Alright, there we go. I just want to give out two. Yeah.